All right, guys, we are coming at you live now from 13 News Now. Meteorologist Evan Stewart here, meteorologist Tim Pandajis. We're going to give it a minute to kind of grow the audience a little bit. We want to kind of give you an opportunity to ask some questions about Dorian coming our way as we head through the next 36 hours, and also go through some of the latest data that we're getting in now just after the evening newscast has kind of just wrapped up. So we'll give it a second or two, and then we'll start our overall broadcast here, and you can ask questions as we go along the way. How's that sound?
That sounds very good. We've already got some folks checking in, asking what to expect in Chesapeake. Wind and rain, certainly.
Yeah, we're going to give a broad overall perspective of what's going to happen. Of course, we're going to get down to some of the bigger cities and towns and everything, but we really just can't tell you exactly what's going to happen in your neighborhood.
Right. We can't go street by street, certainly, but we'll get, like you said, we'll give you a general overview of what each region of Hampton Roads can expect. We'll break it down: southern Outer Banks, northern Outer Banks, inland, coastal areas, inland locations.
Well, we're already up to over 500 viewers, so we'll get going here. First, behind Evan and I right now is the latest tropical alerts that are out there. And you can see they span a large stretch of the eastern seaboard from the middle parts of Florida all the way up to the border with Delaware in the mid-Atlantic. And those are tropical storm warnings now through our area in the orange, and we have the hurricane warnings a little bit farther to the south.
Right, and pretty much everybody in Virginia that is in our 13 News Now viewing area is under that tropical storm warning. And we have that hurricane warning that's Camden, Currituck, Pasquotank, Perquimans, Chowan, Dare, Terrell, Hyde, Washington counties. You're under that hurricane warning, meaning that hurricane conditions are expected in 36 hours.
And those hurricane conditions are those strong winds, 74 miles per hour or greater. And as you look at some of the forecast models showing some of the wind speeds, especially down through the Outer Banks, it could get very, very treacherous in the next 36 hours or
very dicey, especially I would say from like Oregon Inlet south. You'll probably see the worst of the winds based on the current track of the storm. And as Jeff was mentioning, there are a couple of models that are hinting that the storm might be a little bit farther to the north. So we're going to have to watch that closely.
Yeah, very dependent on exactly where the center of Dorian goes. And already within this last couple of hours that we're going to show you here in a second, after this latest update here, which is the storm surge warnings. They are now warnings for the entire area, all in the purple here. What exactly should people expect with a storm surge warning, or that issue that would be a threat?
Well, the issue will be for all the really low areas that are in Hampton Roads. And if you've lived here for any amount of time, you know those areas that typically flood when we get the heavy rain or we get a nor'easter or a coastal system. Those are the areas we're watching once again. And with the winds coming in initially out of the east and eventually the north, I think some of the biggest issues with this storm might be through areas of Poquoson and some of the north-facing beaches, areas of Virginia Beach and Norfolk, and then down the southern branch of the Elizabeth River as those winds come in. So we're talking about getting close to areas of downtown Norfolk and maybe even into the eastern branch or the western branch of the Elizabeth River, because those winds are just going to push the water down the Elizabeth River. And then we worry about soundside flooding down through the Outer Banks.
So kind of two phases we're looking at here.
Correct.
As Dorian is centered over the Outer Banks, we're going to have the onshore winds. Once it exits off to the east, northeast, they're going to wrap around coming in out of the northwest. So two separate instances could see some pretty significant tidal surges as well as storm surge.
That's right, and we're really watching the Friday afternoon high tide. That's after the center starts to exit off the coastline, but it's that wind wrapping around on the backside that first it's going to push it up, and then it's going to push it down.
Yeah, so something certainly to watch there. Dorian is a little bit stronger this evening, Evan. Not all that surprising. It's sitting over the Gulf Stream waters, which are like 88 degrees.
Right.
You need 80 or warmer. And you notice it kind of has that ragged eye showing up again with some pretty strong thunderstorm activity around it.
That's right. We kind of lost the eye there a little bit. Some dry air got pulled into it, but now we're seeing those big thunderstorms, especially wrapping around the western side of the storm. Some indications, again, we've seen the pressure dropping a little bit. So I don't think we're going to see a massive amount of re-strengthening, but we're only 1 mile per hour away from a Category 3 once again. Right. So if it does bump up to 115, we're talking about a major hurricane once again off the southeast coast.
And also, as it's beginning to lift north now at around 8 miles per hour, the wind field is expanding. And I think it's 195 miles from the center. You're getting the tropical storm force winds.
That's right. Just a couple of days ago, it was closer to 165, 170. Now we're up to 195. There you're talking about those warm waters, 88, 86 degree water temperature.
Sitting right over the Gulf Stream right now, yeah. exceptionally warm, and all that is fuel for these storms to continue to kind of grow. Here's the latest to track as of 7 o'clock. We're doing the hourly advisories now from the Hurricane Center, and this takes it pretty much along the geography of the southeast coastline, and moving right over the Outer Banks, potentially Cape Lookout and Cape Hatteras.
That's right, and we split the monitors up just a little bit so you'll be able to see them on both sides when we go full screen. But yes, don't focus on that center line of the track. You know, people get caught up on the cone of uncertainty, and we've even heard a few folks here say, oh, I see Norfolk's not in the cone anymore. Well, that means we're out of the woods. No, not at all, because if the storm follows the exact path, we're still talking about 195 miles on either side. So the cone doesn't show the massive size of the storm. And we probably got the other graphic coming up here in a minute where we've got the wind field. And that'll show you that the wind field is more like this. So it's bigger than the cone. Don't focus on the cone and say, oh, I'm in Newport News. I don't have anything to worry about.
And Jeff was talking about in the 6 o'clock that the center of the storms only stay within that cone 2/3 of the time. So there's a 33% chance that it could be somewhere outside of that. Unlikely, but it's a possibility, certainly.
Right, absolutely. And, you know, the Hurricane Center has been sticking with that track. And here we were talking about some of the computer models. You can see a couple of these that are in the yellows and oranges. Those are what are typically more our hurricane computer models. And they've consistently been a little bit farther to the north and west. We've got some that are still south and east, including like the Euro and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's still a good spread there. You know, a difference of 10, 20 miles farther to the north and west could mean bigger impacts here. Farther to the south and east, much lesser impacts, which would be some better news to see.
That's right, and that's what we would like to see, certainly. Here's a look at the radar, and again, you can just see those bands just coming on shore. But, you know, even though we talk about the strongest winds are around the eye wall, some of these bands can have 60, 70, 80 mile per hour wind gusts with them. And we haven't seen a lot of tornado warnings, but there have been a couple. And it's not unheard of that a landfalling hurricane or one right along the coast could produce a couple of isolated tornadoes.
And it's just been amazing watching this coming in from the east and then slamming on the brakes before really bringing a lot of impacts to the east coast of Florida. There's that wind graphic you were talking about. Hurricane force winds out 70 miles now from the center.
That's right. So that's expanded just a little bit. Now, keep in mind that the strongest winds are around that eye wall, but still, you've got 74 mile per hour plus winds, 70 miles across this center. So 140 miles is the width of the diameter of that whole wind field.
Yeah, and almost a 400-mile diameter wind field for the tropical storm force wind. So even though it's set up off the coastline, those winds, as you can see here, and even as we go out farther in time, they do stretch up along the coastline and move pretty far inland.
Right, so you can see Tim is driving this, you know, as it works its way up here. 10:30 tomorrow night, we're already talking about areas around Wilmington getting hurricane force winds, and that expands into much of coastal Carolina, certainly through the Pamlico Sound, possibly even up towards Manio, Roanoke Island, Friday 9 a.m. And that's first with those winds coming in out of the east. And then on the backside already, we're talking about Ocracoke getting those northwest winds, possibly of some sound side flooding.
And that tropical storm force wind stretching way out into southeastern Virginia through a large chunk of Hampton Roads before it exits on off towards the
I wanted
north.
to go back to that just real quick. Let's go through that one more time. And because we were talking about, you know, here's the Hurricane Center forecast line. But what happens if the center of the storm is 10, 20, 30 more miles off towards the north and west, and then the extent of the tropical storm force winds are back towards Williamsburg, Newport News, and Greensville County. So that's why a little bit of a wobble. We saw that with Matthew. It was looking like it was going to go out, and then we had a little bit of a wobble to the north. And it's those wobbles that, you know, I don't want the folks off towards the north and west to think that you're out of the woods with this storm, because I still think that we will see some of the impacts up across areas of the peninsula.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's spend a second here and look at some of the questions coming on in from all of you watching. We have 700 people tuned in right now. Let's see some good ones. I wanted to know if power is going to go out. We're actually going to address that. We have a pretty cool graphic that Evan made earlier, kind of with a power outage index to give you a feel of what may happen with the forecast winds. How is Suffolk going to be? Are Norfolk schools closed tomorrow? We don't know that yet.
They haven't come in. I know Portsmouth, I think they're closing early on Thursday. That might change by tomorrow morning. We'll have to wait and see. And I imagine, yes, a lot of the local school systems will follow, because we are under tropical storm warning right now.
Yeah, so let's see what everybody else is asking about. kind of asking in their neighborhood what it's going to be like. What about the commute back and forth to Newport News?
Right, I think the morning commute will be fine. That afternoon commute still should be pretty good because it doesn't look like it's going to be until after rush hour that the rain starts to move into the metro of Hampton Roads.
Right, okay. Yeah, we're going to address some tidal flooding issues too in just a second here as we progress on through our graphics and talk a little bit more about it. Let's talk about the winds, because the first thing you think about with a hurricane or a tropical system is the winds. How strong is it going to be? What kind of gusts are we looking at here? This is one computer model, the European model that, most people have heard about, that and the American model. And this kind of tells us, we pick some cities and towns here, pick one that's closest to you, and you get a general feel of what it's going to look like. As we progress in time here, we'll watch the storm kind of move up the coastline and move right over the Hatteras area, and these wind gusts really start to jump upwards during that time. You'll watch the numbers here, and they kind of change the color scale too, especially out towards Hatteras. We're going to see those numbers jump up through the 60s and even into the 70s, 80s, and nearly 100 miles per hour, possibly through Hatteras. And then you go farther north of there, you got areas like Edenton, 60 mile per hour possible wind gusts at that point, 52 in Elizabeth City, and Matthews around 39, and Virginia Beach 46 miles per hour in that particular area too. 77 in Edenton as we get to late morning on Friday. So these winds will be with us because the center of that storm, as you see it here on this model, is parked just south of Manio.
Right, and that follows along almost identical to where we have the hurricane warnings and where we have the tropical storm warning. So again, these are wind gust potential, not sustained, but certainly the potential is there for those hurricane force wind gusts. And it's really going to be areas close to the Chesapeake Bay, the Albemarle Sound, the Pamlico Sound, and the Atlantic Ocean. Because as the wind is coming in, when it gets over land, there's friction, there's trees, there's buildings. But when it's coming in off the water, there's nothing to slow that wind down. And that's why the coastal areas always see the strongest winds.
Yeah, and then as it pulls away, as we get into Friday afternoon, kind of a prolonged wind event here, because even as we go through the lunch hour and 2 p.m., we're still looking at 80-mile-an-hour winds through Hatteras, Elizabeth City up and over 60, 56 in Hampton, Norfolk at 55. So a very windy day on Friday, even after the heaviest rain exits the region that we're going to show.
That's right. And Hatteras, if it follows the European track and the eye goes right over Hatteras, you start out with winds in one direction, you go through the eye wall, you get a break, and then the winds switch from the other direction. So after several hours of the winds blowing trees in one direction, then they blow them in the other and kind of rocks them back and forth. And that's why I think we will have issues with trees and power line issues, coastal areas, even in Virginia.
Yeah, and even into the later parts of the afternoon hours here, Evan, we'll see the timeline kind of progress here and show that those numbers still staying pretty high. Breezy Friday afternoon to Friday evening, and then finally by Saturday morning, we'll see things really calm down. Kind of a more close-up look here with some of the areas as we go through some of the wind gust potential here from the European model. We'll see those gusts start to approach in over 60 miles per hour down to KDH, 50 miles per hour in Virginia Beach, and some of those numbers creeped up over 80 by KDH and 52 in Virginia Beach before things quiet down by Friday night.
That's right, and you can see for all the areas, that includes the peninsula down through Southside, northeastern North Carolina. Those are some of the numbers. Now we want to talk about the storm surge. And first, Tim, explain to people, well, what is the storm surge? What is that?
So we had talked about the winds coming onshore for a prolonged period of time, and with tropical systems, it tends to pile up that water along low-lying areas along the coastline, and eventually it's going to overwhelm a lot of those low-lying areas. So you see the water levels rise. When you factor into that high tide cycles, astronomical high tides that we're already seeing from a new moon that happened on Friday, we're looking at some pretty impressive levels here, all the way down south of Florida, lifting northwards, 2 to 4 foot surge through Daytona Beach, Savannah 3 to 5 feet, Charleston area 4 to 7.
That's right, and that's going to continue this 5 to 8 from Charleston up towards the North Carolina, South Carolina state line and into Wilmington, Morehead City, some of those areas that were hard hit last year or a couple years ago with our storms. So now we've got another round of some incredible storm surge. And again, with the winds blowing in, even through parts of the Chesapeake Bay, 2 to 4. That's why these are the areas that are also under that storm surge warning. Right,
2 to 4 feet storm surge potential in that blue, 4 to 6 farther south there. Here's a look. We're going to do a bunch of comparisons here of all the different computer models and the rainfall outputs, completely determinate from where the center of Dorian goes. So here's the GFS model, the American, that shows anywhere from 5 to 8 inches farther to the south and east here, a huge gradient or drop off to the northwest.
That's right, and you know, again, these numbers are not gospel, but this is more just to give you the general idea that the heavier rain, at least according to the American model, will be south and east. But you know, I wouldn't be surprised if Newport News picks 2 inches or 3. You know, this is just to kind of give you that general idea because not all the models agree, right, Tim?
And you could double those totals as you move farther north and west if this jogs 10 to 20 miles northwest of there. Europeans, pretty similar, very heavy totals out towards the Albemarle Sound, though.
That's right. We're looking at 7, 8, maybe 9 inches, 10 inches of rain. The good news is we haven't been totally saturated so far this summer.
Yeah.
It was a lot wetter this spring, and then things really kind of started to dry out a little bit this summer, so we're not dealing already with the saturated ground like we did with Isabel. Folks who remember that, and that's why we had so many trees down. We were coming in fairly wet. We're about 2 inches above normal for the year right now.
Right.
But again, 7, 8, 9, 10 inches of rain, that's a lot of rain over a short period of time.
It was a similar situation, too, with Matthew, right? When we were about 14 inches above average?
14 inches above normal with Matthew.
So here's a look at the RPM rainfall model. Evan, what do you make of this? I mean, these are some serious totals.
Yes.
What's going on with this model?
Well, the RPM model is based on another model called the NAM, and that model actually has a storm about 30 or 40 miles farther north than what the European and the American model do, the GFS. So that's why that whole rain band has shifted off towards the north. It brings the heavier rain instead of over the Albemarle Sound region over the south side of northeastern North Carolina, and likewise that bumps up the rainfall totals in some of our far northern and western locations.
Right, so freshwater flooding here from all this heavy rain, the tidal flooding, the storm surge. So 3 different instances that water could impact you as Dorian moves on through.
Right, and folks know that we get a lot of rain in downtown Norfolk, and that overwhelms the storm drains. Those storm drains empty into the river.
Right.
So if the river's coming up, there have been cases where we see, you know, like the water coming out of the storm drains from the rising storm surge and the rising tides. So if the water can't go down, then it's just going to stay there.
Talking about tides, could have some major flooding on our hands here as we get towards Sewell's Point, the high tide cycle Friday afternoon. What are some of these levels like? Have we experienced those before around here?
We absolutely have. 7.0. The major flooding starts at 6.5. Once you start to get up at 7, we're talking about more streets than, you know, your typical average flooded streets start to get water on them. Isabel was 7.89. The record is just over 8 feet. That was with the 1933 hurricane. So we're, you know, talking 7, 8, 9 inches lower than what we saw with Isabel, and a few other storms were up into the upper 6s to around 7, which we'll have those coming up in a minute too.
Right, it's not only at Sewell's Point running high, Yorktown too, looking at some major flooding here for the afternoon, high tide Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, 5.5 feet there. Nuisance flooding for the Saturday morning one, and Duck Pier, look at those numbers, 6.9 feet.
That's right, and each location they have a little bit of a different criteria for what is nuisance, minor, major, or, you know, moderate flooding. Even Duck Pier, though, we are talking about that high tide, and we're also worried about that sound side flooding that would extend down the Outer Banks.
Right, right. And for comparison here, tides at Sewell's Point, if we were to get 6.5 to 7 feet, you're looking at some pretty memorable company here.
That's right. Isabel, as we mentioned, 7.89. Irene, which a lot of folks remember, these ice storms, I tell you. Although now we've got a D storm, Dorian, but this ice storm, Irene, 7.56. So we're talking about a half a foot from where we were, a foot to a half of a foot from where we were with Irene. And Hermine, just a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, we were at 6.2. So it would be higher than what we saw with Hermine.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's break down exactly what to expect depending on your location across Hampton Roads in northeastern North Carolina. Okay, we have 6 different areas. We'll start with inland Hampton Roads. The timing for everybody is going to be late Thursday through the day on Friday. Our winds will start out of the northeast, end up out of the northwest as the shift in Dorian center moves offshore. 30 to 40 mile per hour winds for inland areas of Hampton Roads with gusts up to around 50. 1 to 5 inches. Remember that sharp cutoff to the northwest? You look at that 1 inch farther south and east, closer to 4 or 5. Moderate tidal flooding and moderate overall impact.
That's right. And then as we look ahead here towards coastal Hampton Roads, again, we mentioned earlier that the coastal areas will see the bigger impacts than the inland spots. So we're looking at those winds 40 to 55 miles per hour, gusts to 65, maybe 70 right along the ocean front. And again, that's certainly enough to cause some issues with some trees, with some power lines, and 3 to 6 inches of rain That's just as an average. There will be some areas, I know, that'll have more than 6 inches of rain. And as we already talked about, some major tidal flooding issues coming up Friday afternoon.
Absolutely. How about interior areas of northeastern North Carolina? Again, that same timing, 30 to 50 mile per hour winds with gusts higher than that, just under hurricane force possibly. 3 to 8 inches of rainfall, moderate to major tidal flooding for you. And the overall impact, moderate to high.
And as we work once again towards the coast, we'll start off with the northern Outer Banks, 40 to 60 mile per hour winds, gusts to 80. So we are talking about those wind gusts over hurricane force, 4 to 8 inches of rain. Some spots are going to get 9 to 10, I'm sure. And then with that major tidal flooding on the sound side, I think that'll be the bigger story as we get into the afternoon on Friday. So we've seen Roanoke Island, Manio and Wanchese. Manio, certainly, we've seen the water come ashore and come right through the town. There's a very good chance that we could see that again.
Yeah, an overall impact there looking to be high. Southern Outer Banks, this is likely going to be ground zero for our area to see the highest, most significant impacts. 5 to 10 inches of rain, but the wind, 50 to 80 miles per hour with those gusts up to around 90. On top of that, major tidal flooding is expected there. Let's talk about that power outage index.
That's right. A lot of folks have been asking, do you think we will lose power? Well, this is a computer model simulation of where we think that there could be some issues with some power outages, and the outlying areas back north and west of 64 and 95. That's in the yellow. We're talking about some isolated power outages. But I think we will see quite a few scattered power outages through the peninsula, interior south side, interior North Carolina, and numerous power outages here through maybe the southern tip of the eastern shore, Virginia Beach, eastern Chesapeake, and down through eastern North Carolina. Again, the same areas that are under the hurricane warning, that are also under the storm surge warning, are also at the biggest risk of seeing numerous power outages.
Yeah, so this will probably maybe even increase or change depending on the exact track and the strongest wind. So we'll see how that plays out here. But that's a good way to kind of look at things. We'll wrap things up here, Evan, with talking about Dorian isn't the only storm out there.
That's right. We've got two others.
Yes. Yeah, one that just went back down to a tropical depression, Fernand, and Gabrielle. But are there any threats to any land?
Well, Fernand has actually already come ashore. Oh,
whoa!
Yeah. let's get back to that. Let's see if we can go in here again. We'll do that. And yes, Fernand came ashore already, or is just about to come ashore, right along the Mexican coastline in the Gulf of Mexico. And Gabrielle looks like it'll stay off in the North Atlantic. And then we got another little swirl that is out here northeast of the Bahamas. That's fortunately working towards the north and east. And then we got this bugger down here.
Yeah, that one's a little bit low latitude, so we have to watch those pretty carefully and see if it tracks more westerly before it gets picked up northwest. So that's going to be something interesting to watch. I have a question here, a great one from Ryan Creekmore. Any possibility for hurricane force winds further inland?
If the track shifts, that is certainly possible.
Yeah, and it's also, depending on the track, like you said, but also, as you had mentioned earlier, when it's over land for longer, the wind gets slowed down from all the friction. So it's a little bit harder to get those stronger winds well inland.
But it's not out of the realm of possibility that
True.
there could be a gust that does come up close to hurricane force, even in some of those inland locations.
Yeah. The expected rainfall, somebody asked, we had gone through that, anywhere from 4 to 8. It's really going to depend on where you're located. Less off to the north and west, higher farther south and east. Somebody asked, what is going to make Dorian start to race away from the Outer Banks and up to Canada?
That's a very good question, because we saw it slow down. We saw it put on the brakes. And the way I kind of explain it is, think of the steering patterns of the atmosphere like rivers of air. And hurricanes, while they are massive storms, they really don't steer themselves. They need something to push them along. So in some ways, think of a hurricane like a leaf floating in a river following those streams. And sometimes you get into an area of the stream where things slow down, and sometimes they get picked up. We've got a front that's going to give it a little bit of a nudge and push it back into the steering currents to finally make it race off towards the north and east.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it acts like a fluid, so sometimes it slows down, sometimes it moves faster. We'll maybe see another question or two, and then we'll wrap things up here. Let's see. Is there a chance it could still move closer to Virginia Beach?
There is certainly a chance. Someone was asking about what was Matthew's flood levels. The flooding issues that we had with Matthew was from rain, not from the storm surge. We really didn't have a lot of that. We had the very heavy rain that just couldn't drain, especially in some areas of Virginia Beach.
Well, it looks like that's it for right now. We appreciate everybody joining in. We had over 700 people watching at one point. I just wanted to bring you up to date on the latest information here. Of course, Jeff will be here later on for 13 News Now at 11. Evan and I will be back tomorrow, and we have a lot of extensive coverage planned for everybody to make sure that we are ahead of Dorian.
That's right. We're going to start. We'll have some extended coverage tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, starting at 8 p.m. We have a special 8 p.m. to 11. We'll have an extended 11 o'clock newscast, and we're starting daybreak early. And right now, it sounds like, Tim, you might be out in the storm chaser.
Fine with me. Fine with me. 2 a.m.
right,
start.
yep.
That's good with me. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday afternoon. And, of course, you will always be on social media if you have any questions.